Good morning, church. How you doing today? It is Easter Sunday, and I am so excited that you guys are here. If we've never met, my name's T.J, pastor here at the Shore, and we are kicking off a brand new series called UnScripted. But before I jump into that, I've got to tell you, we have a special opportunity before us today. It is Easter Sunday, but it is also April 1st, which means it's April Fools. So parents, you have an incredible opportunity to prank your children so hard today, like so hard. Take those Easter eggs and stuff them with vegetables and go hide those things. Or, even better than that, just tell them to go in the backyard and find the eggs that you never hid, right? Or maybe you could do this. This is my favorite. You know those little chocolate eggs about that big? They come with a foil wrapping? Unwrap it, eat the chocolate. Put a grape in the wrapper, wrap it back up, right? Here, kids, scarred for life is what that happens, right? But you'll be in their life forever because when they go to counseling, they'll constantly remember you. Anyway, but of course, the one of them all is Jesus. I'm dead. April Fools, I'm alive, right? He is alive, which is why we celebrate, which is why we're here today. Man, what a great day. But hey, when you came in, you got a packet of information. It looks like this. On the bottom, there's a perforated section we call the Connect card. If you wouldn't mind, do me a favor and filling this out. In fact, if you've filled this out 1,000,000 times, could you please fill it out? Because this is the one day I get everyone in our church in the building. And so if you have updated information, I would like to know that so I can keep my contact with you up to date, all right? And on the backside, there's a survey that will help us serve you better in the future as a church. And we'll reference this card again at the end. Now, in the end of service, some buckets will go by, and that's where you take the card and you put it in. It's also an opportunity for us to give, and we love here at the Shore to give towards big projects. We love to take big days like today, and make sure that we give towards outside the walls of the church, to places that we may never be able to go, but we give to big projects. So at Christmas, we raised enough money with that offering to purchase land in the Dominican Republic and build a skills training center all on that day. Is that not amazing that we get to do something like that? And so that project is in the works. I've already seen the architectural plans. We have trips planned in June and July to go to the Dominican Republic. At our Vision Sunday, we wanted to outfit a skills training center in Durban, South Africa, so we could, again, help break the cycle of poverty in these kids' lives. And so we raised enough money. You guys gave enough money to make sure that was fully outfitted. And then today, what we want to do is we want to go to northern India and buy a piece of property for a medical center. And so everything we give today goes towards this property right here in northern India. That's an actual picture of what we're going to be helping purchase. Is that not awesome? And I want to show you kind of on a map where this is, right up here in northern part of India, right between Tibet and China, Nepal and Pakistan. In fact, some of the largest cities near it are Delhi to the south and Islamabad to the west. And so this area is so primed for the gospel. So many people need to hear Jesus right there. And we can do that by meeting their needs medically, but also building a church on that same property. So everything collected today is going to go outside the walls of our church to make sure that we are changing the life of somebody else. Is that not good news? Come on. Now, this series, UnScripted, is probably familiar to you because you have a plan for your life, don't you? You may not have a 5-year plan or a 1-week plan, but you know what you don't want to happen, correct? I want good things, I don't want bad things. And if bad things are unscripted, right? And so we go through life with this idea of I want this, but I don't want that. I want this in my life, but I don't want those things. I'd like for my kids or my spouse or my whatever to happen here and there. But sometimes life throws you curveballs and it goes unscripted. You go off the script and you ask the question, God, what are you up to? Because if you are really for me, how on earth is this a part of your plan? But God can work out anything. And what I hope to do today is looking at the cross and the people who are closest to Jesus and how they had these unscripted moments, how God can redeem even the furthest things out there for his glory. And he can work in us because even if it doesn't seem like our life is going the way we planned, God can still be up to something behind the scenes. He can still be working on your behalf and he can redeem anything for you. And so today, what I'm going to do is go to the book of Luke. Now, the author Luke, he wrote one of the Gospels, and the Gospel is the story of Jesus. And he's writing the Gospel, but he writes it from a very unique perspective. You see, Luke was not raised as a Jewish man, while the other authors of the Gospels were Jewish. And so he didn't have any predisposition towards Jesus. He didn't try to make Jesus Messiah. He just keenly observed, and said, you know what, there's something special about this man, Jesus. There's something special about him, the way he teaches, the way that he works with people, the way I see people who were lame, they can walk, right? Like there's something different about him. So he was attracted to Jesus in that way. In fact, Luke came from a perspective that was a very detail-oriented sort of perspective. You see, Luke was a physician. He was a doctor. He's the kind of mind that goes to college for 2 years and then decides 12 more would be awesome. I am not like that. How about you, right? But he leans in and he goes, I want the details. I want the facts. In fact, in Luke chapter 1, verse 3, he gives us the reason why he wrote this book. It says, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you. So Luke, who is in the first century, personally observed Jesus, or was able to interview people who had personally observed Jesus, and he wrote down a detailed account. And when you read the book of Luke and the book of Acts that he also wrote, you are reading the most accurate text from the first century. Not the most accurate biblical text, but any text from the first century. Because the writer, author Luke, the physician, has so much detail in his writings that history and archaeology have constantly reaffirmed what he's written. He covers cities, he covers countries, he covers trade routes, he covers powers and rulers and kingdoms and political happenings time and time again. And all of them are corroborated by archaeology and history and sociology. And so as you read the book of Luke, you can believe what he says because he saw it himself. He interviewed someone who saw it themselves, and it's backed up by so many other sources. So when we read Luke, we are reading what actually happened. And it's with that mindset that I want you to approach the story of Jesus today. That this is the fact of what happened. But I don't want you to approach it from a 2,000 years after the fact mentality, but I want you to go back in time with me. Can you do that? Yes? Okay, good. Let's go back in time. We're going to live in Jerusalem. We're going to go back in time to the week of Passover. Passover is a festival that every year was celebrated by the Jewish people, and you are there. You're wearing a robe, not a bathrobe, but like a robe, and you look good. You guys are rocking those robes. You got sandals on your feet, and you live and you work, and you are raising a family right there in the city of Jerusalem. Now, your city is alive today because the Passover feast is upon you, and people are coming in from all over the nation of Israel and swelling the city to many times its normal size. In fact, over 100,000 people are roaming and working the streets of Jerusalem right now. And there's an excitement in the air as you approach this special meal. And you sit down at the table for this meal, and it's significant because this meal reminds you of the freedom that God has brought your people. You see, your people weren't always free. They were slaves at one point to the Egyptians. And it was this harsh treatment that God saw his people, heard the cries of his people, and he led them to freedom. He sent a deliverer, a man named Moses, that went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "I will not." And so God displayed his power through Moses with miracle after miracle after miracle. And eventually Pharaoh relented, and your people left Egypt to become a nation of their own. And as you eat this meal, you're reminded of this, the bitter herbs, a part of the Passover Seder, and you eat and you remember the bitterness of slavery. And you dip it in the salt water and you remember the tears that your people cried for freedom. But also a part of this meal is not just the freedom that God brought in the past, but it's a promise of freedom for the future. You see, right now, your people aren't free. They were free for a season, but now they're under the rule of the Romans. And before that, it was the Greeks. And before that, it was the Persians. And before that, it was the Babylonians. And before that, it was the Assyrians. Your people have been celebrating for 1,446 years the Passover. And in this time frame, you've been looking for the one called the Messiah, the deliverer, the one who would set your people free like Moses. And this year is especially exciting. It's especially exciting because there's a man on the scene named Jesus. And Jesus fits the bill. He looks the part. You've heard his teachings and the authority with which he speaks. You've heard him speak with God's word, and he's upthrowing the religious order. He's opening the eyes of the blind. The lame can walk. And you even heard that just a few miles from Jerusalem in the little town called Bethany, Jesus spoke to a tomb, and he said, Lazarus, come out. And the man Lazarus was raised from the dead. You see, when you eat this meal, you are excited. You're excited about this Jesus and the potential he has to throw the Romans out of this city, out of this nation, so that you can and your people can find freedom. You see, the Romans, they are great at occupation. They are great at keeping you under their thumb. When you pay taxes, it's to Caesar. When you do something, you need permission from Caesar. And if you step out of line, well, the Romans are really good at executions. And if you step out of line at all, you're going to get it. And so all of this is running through your mind as you sit at this table with your family. The freedom of the past, the predicted freedom of your future, the oppression of the Romans, and the potential of Jesus, the hope that he can bring true and real and lasting freedom to your life. And as you eat this meal, so is Jesus with his disciples in an upper room. And he breaks the bread and he passes the cup and he speaks of all of this and he tells his disciples that the prediction, the things that this meal is speaking of, the future Messiah coming today in your presence, it will be fulfilled before you because I'm the one. And he goes out with his disciples and he goes to pray on a mountain called the Mount of Olives. And at the Mount of Olives, he kneels and he prays, and his disciples are there with him, and except for one disciple, in fact. One disciple named Judas has been looking for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to the religious leaders. This one disciple, Judas, decided to betray Jesus for a sum of money. And the religious leaders wanted to get Jesus off the scene because he was ruining it for them. You see, they were the religious authority. They were the ones that could tell you what to do and when to do it from a religious standpoint, and they did not like this Jesus guy shaking things up. He didn't like him and his power, and that the people that used to follow them were now following him, and so they decided they needed to get rid of Jesus once and for all. And Judas betrays him, and he leads the priests and the guards of the temple into this garden on the Mount of Olives. And they bring him to Jesus, and with a kiss, he betrays him. They surround Jesus and they arrest him. And through the night, they put on a trial. They hire some people to falsely accuse Jesus of things, and they accuse him of slander. They accuse him of claiming to be the next king. They accuse him of so many things. And they condemn him to die. They bring him the next morning to the house of Pilate. He's the Roman leader. They say, this man must die. And Pilate says, I see nothing wrong with him. Why would I kill him? Why don't you just go do it yourselves? And they say, we cannot kill him. It's Roman rule that you must do this. He has broken the law. So Pilate goes to the stairs in front of his palace with two men, Jesus on one side and Barabbas on the other. And as you leave your house Saturday morning, you notice that there's something different in the air. You went to bed with hope. You went to bed with a feeling of joy and peace that Jesus the Messiah was about to fulfill what the Passover had been talking about for nearly 1,500 years. Hope was on the horizon. Freedom was coming. Yet as you walk into the street, you see a crowd gathering. And you stand as a part of the crowd and you see up on the stairs Pilate. On one side is Jesus and one side is Barabbas. Barabbas the insurrectionist, Barabbas the murderer. And Pilate stands there and he says, "It is my custom to release one prisoner on Passover. Who do you want?" And the religious leaders speak to the crowd and they incite them and they say, "Barabbas, Barabbas, give us Barabbas." And Barabbas is released. And Pilate says, "What would you have me do with this man, Jesus?" And again, the religious leaders turn to the crowd and they utter a word full of pain, a word full of hatred, a word full of humiliation. They say, "Crucify, crucify." And the crowd's roar grows. And you're even caught up in the moment wondering what could be happening here. The crucifixion is coming for Jesus. And Pilate says, "But I see nothing wrong." But the crowd shouts louder, "Crucify, crucify, crucify." Pilate washes his hands symbolically, saying, "His blood's not on my hands, but on yours." And he sends Jesus away to the praetorium, the locker room of the Roman guard, where they begin to beat him. And they blindfold him and they say, "Who hit you? If you're such a great prophet, tell us, who punched you?" They pull out bits of his beard. And they take a cat of 9 tails, a whip with 9 strips of leather embedded with rock and stone and clay. And with surgical precision, they lay waste to Jesus' back to the point where his rib cage would be exposed. And on that fresh wound, they place a purple cloth, a robe, upon him, and a crown of thorns dug into his skull, and they mock him as king. They push him out into the streets. And they place a heavy cross upon his shoulder to walk up a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. Yet he collapses under the weight. So they grab a man, Simon, from the side of the road and say, "You carry his cross." And up the hill Jesus goes with Simon following behind him carrying the cross. And the cross is laid upon the ground, and Jesus has a nail pierced through his hand on one side and a nail on the other, with one nail through both of his feet. They lift him up, and with a thud, Jesus is crucified. The sign above him reads, "Here is King of the Jews." And on either side, there are 2 criminals crucified beside him, and Jesus in the middle, like a common thief. And you're in the crowd observing, wondering, how can this be? How can he really be the one that brings freedom if he's up there on a cross? How can the one that opened the eyes of the blind now be blinded by the blood in his eyes? How can the one that would heal the lame not get off this cross? How could the one that raised the dead, how could he die this way? And around you, the crowds are taunting him, jeering him. The Roman guards are saying, "If you said you would save others, why don't you save yourself first?" Even one of the thieves joins in mocking him. And about the noon hour, the sky grows dark as night. And Jesus breathes his last breath, and as he exhales, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And the ground begins to shake. And the temple curtain is torn in two, and the jeering and the mocking turns to sobbing and weeping, because the people realize what's just occurred. Even the Roman leader, the guard who was overseeing this execution, this crucifixion, begins to change his mind. He says, "Surely this man was the Son of God. After what I've just seen, we've done something horribly wrong." A man named Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate and requests the body of Jesus. He takes him down off the cross and places him in a tomb carved from the rock like a cave. They wrap his body in linens and they lay him there. The religious leaders go to Pilate and say, "Jesus predicted a resurrection. We want you to put a stone in front of the tomb. We want you to put guards there because we do not want a resurrection, not on our watch." And so they roll the heavy stone in the way and they place 2 guards to make sure that no one takes the body of Jesus. Jesus is not going anywhere. That night you lie in bed, trying to sleep, trying to understand what's going on in this day, but you can't. Because this can't be the script that God has for the Messiah. This can't be the direction that you could possibly take, God. Really? The next day is the day of rest, the Sabbath, but you can't rest. You're supposed to worship God, but you don't know how after what you just saw. You're supposed to prepare yourself for the week. You're supposed to honor God, but you just do not know what's happening. And so that night you try to sleep again, but you just can't. The next day you wake up and you decide it's business as usual. Jesus is gone, the hope is gone, the Passover is over. And so you decide it's back to business, back to work. And so you meet your business partner in Jerusalem and you set off for business. 7 miles to the city of Emmaus, and so you start to walk. And as you walk with your friend, you begin to recount the events that have occurred. You say, how could this be a part of God's plan? Jesus was so great, so powerful, so wonderful. He taught with authority. He healed people. Yet here he is, gone, dead. It's hopeless. And you ask the question, how could this be God's script for this? And as you're walking, a man comes along. And he asks you, what were you talking about so intently as you were on the road there? And in Luke chapter 24, we read these words. This is the response that you give. This is exactly what you're thinking and you're feeling. The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth, they said, he was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. And the passage here continues, but our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. And then this is the sentence. This is the summarization of what you've been feeling on that Friday and that hopeless Saturday. And now Sunday morning, you're thinking, we had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. We had hope, but hope is gone. We had hope, but I don't even know. I'm so foolish. I don't even know why I believed him in the first place. He's clearly not the one. I'm hopeless now. And I'm sure we've all felt that same feeling. And so this man begins to walk with you and your friend. And he begins to open up God's word and explain some things to you. He speaks of Moses, the deliverer of Israel from the hand of the Egyptians. He speaks of the prophets that talked about the Messiah. And he began to open your eyes to something. You begin to open your eyes to the fact that the Messiah was prophesied to die, but rise again. That he was prophesied to be the one that would heal the nation, that would find healing for the people of Israel, and that he would be the king of the Jews, but not of an earthly kingdom, but of a spiritual kingdom. And as you get to this city of Emmaus, you sit down with this man and you have a meal, and as he breaks the bread, something wonderful comes to you. You have this revelation, your eyes are open for the first time that this is no ordinary man, and hope is restored to your soul, and joy begins to overflow, and you get to see that this is not just a man, it's the man, Jesus, that Jesus himself has been walking with you and talking with you. He is alive. And you look at your friend, and Jesus disappears, and immediately you go back to Jerusalem. And as you are on your way back, you run into more believers, and you find the other disciples, and you find the women that went early to the tomb that saw Jesus, and Jesus himself appears before a group of disciples. And in Jesus' own words, he begins to speak the truth that I just told you. He says this in chapter 24. He says, yes, it was written long ago that the Messiah would suffer and die and rise from the dead on the third day. It was also written that this message would be proclaimed in the authority of his name to all the nations beginning in Jerusalem. And this is the message. Here is the message that Jesus wants proclaimed on this day and all days across all the world. There is forgiveness of sins for all who repent. that Jesus did not come just to bring freedom from the oppressive Romans, but yet he came to bring freedom over death itself. The consequences of sin is death, and we carry that within us. Yet Jesus said, that's not the price you will pay. You will receive freedom if you ask me for it. And he will bring about right standing in you. And he's not come to fix your life. He didn't come to overthrow the Romans. He didn't come to get rid of the bad stuff in your life and make it good. He came to give you a new life altogether. And he speaks this truth over us. I love how Paul says it in the book of Colossians chapter 2. He says this, that's Jesus canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross. What was once hanging over our head, what was once hurting us and paining us, guilt and shame reigning over us, the threat of death constantly upon us, Jesus says, I've taken that away and I've nailed it to the cross. And no longer do you have to fear the consequences of sin, but you can have eternal life, new life, real life with him starting today. And it is that truth that Jesus says, that message that we live for today, that we proclaim today, and that we embrace today. Now, in a moment, I'm going to pray a prayer, but before I do, I want to ask you to respond for me. Earlier, I referenced the Connect card. Could you pull that back out? And on the back side over here, there's A, B, C, and D. And I would like everyone here to fill that out. A, B, C, and D. And here's what that means. This is the way I want you to respond to our message today. A stands for this. I'm already in a real relationship with Jesus. If that's you, can you do me a favor, mark the box A on there, and when the buckets go by later, put it in. If today is a day that you are deciding, you know what, I want to begin that relationship with Jesus, can you mark B, which is beginning a real relationship with Jesus? For some of you, you're hearing this message, but you want to do some more digging. You want to learn a little bit more before you follow him. That's fine. Can you mark C? You need to consider it a bit more. And some of you are here, and you say, you know what, I'm just here because someone made me come. And you don't intend to make that decision. That's D. I ask you, will you mark that? Because I believe that our God who rose again can set people free. And even if you never intend to make that decision, I believe that he can get in your life and he can make some changes. And God, I'm going to be praying for you. I believe that he can work in you. Will you please let me know? So here's what we're going to do. For those of you who marked B, that you want to begin that relationship, I want to pray a prayer. It's so simple. And it just says, God, I give you my life. Well, I want a new life from you. Forgive me of my sins and my brokenness, and I give you everything I am. I pray that you would nail my old life to the cross, that I may have a new life in you. So this morning, why don't you do me a favor? Would you have a moment of prayer with me? No one moving around, just kind of a quiet moment between you and God. In fact, if it helps you, you can close your eyes and bow your heads. We can pray. So this simple prayer. It says, Lord, today I give you my life. Forgive me of all the things that I've done that have separated me from you. Today I accept your gift of forgiveness. I accept who you are, the reality of who you are, and I make you the Lord of my life. Thank you for this new life that only you can give. In your name we pray. Amen. Why don't you put your hands together for the people who just prayed that prayer.
Thank you so much for joining us online today. If you prayed that prayer with us, we would like to help you on your spiritual journey. If you don't mind going to theshorechurch.com or emailing us at hello@theshorechurch.com, we can send you some information to start this spiritual journey of faith. And of course, we'd always love to see you in person at The Shore Church, 3375 Fruitville Road.